Hello everyone. So a few days ago, I was finally able to beat Dying Light 2. This review comes in with about 30 hours into the game. Decent amounts of the side stuff done, but definitely not all of it, and a first run of the campaign done. So if you want to check out that, I will link the start of, of course, my playthrough up top for convenience sake. But of course, that'll come after the video. If you want to check out my entire playthrough, I live streamed it on Twitch. There's a bit of episodes I did with no commentary or no face cam, but a decent amount of it, I want to say at least more than half, as me talking over it and interacting with my Twitch chat. So if you don't like that, it's definitely, you can stay away from those episodes. But if you want to check out a little bit of my playthrough, of course, it's going to be linked down there. So of course, this is Techland, and it comes 5 years after the first Dying Light comes out. And it takes place kind of about 15 years after the events of the first one, where the virus was cured in the first one, but then in this one, there is a bunch of stuff that goes down. The scientists get greedy, and kind of like the Umbrella Corporation and the Resident Evil franchise, they create another strain of the virus that's a lot deadlier, and it definitely puts the word into way more shambles than it was in the events of the first game. You play as a new protagonist named Aiden, and I'll kind of get into the story in a little bit here. But this is my review for Dying Light 2 Stay Human, so let us get into it. So I played this game on PC, so that's definitely, I can't speak to any of the console versions, but on the PC version, it did play and look pretty damn good. I will say that it definitely, this game was supposed to come out a few years ago, and just in terms of the gameplay, how it feels and how it looks, definitely does feel that way too. It is aged, but that doesn't mean that it's not playable or anything like that. So when it comes to graphics and how things run, I mean, I'm not too picky on it. It runs just fine, it plays just fine. I had my fun with it, and there are a decent amounts of bugs that you are going to encounter in this. Some, like, none game breaking, but definitely game delaying that I was able to run into. You'll find like floating textures, zombies kind of popping in and out of nowhere, spawning right in front of you as you're running. But kind of those are just not really ones that definitely break the game, but the ones that come close to it, I found was, I was a little nervous that my PC might have been dying out on me, where I'd get into the main menu and launch the game, and then it would crash as it's trying to launch. Ran PC tests, my PC was just fine. I tried launching other games, no problem, but it would sometimes take like 6 or 7 times for me to be able to actually get the game running out of the main menu into the actual game. Game was up to date, all those things. So, like, little things like that. A few crashes that I had, and one corrupted save file, but I was actually just able to, like, preload a save that I had done previously, and it worked just fine after that. So little things, like I said, nothing game breaking or things that would really affect my progression, just little tedious fixes that came probably a little more frequently than I would have liked it to. But the gameplay is very smooth in this. It's definitely a huge step up from the first game, where the parkour feels a lot more smoother, and in the first hour or two of the game, it doesn't feel like it's really that open. But once you get into either one of really the two main cities, especially the second one, but you do get it in the first city, it really opens up, and there's so much parkouring that you can do on the grounds, in between buildings, inside of buildings, and then on top of buildings too. There's a lot of freedom, and it feels really good once you start updating your character Aiden. Where it did feel very clunky, same with the combats for like the first 2 3 hours, but once you start getting the upgrades, doing challenges, things like that, to again increase your abilities, find new weapons, things like that, it really streamlines itself and gets really good. It just feels very smooth to play. The combat is a lot more meatier this time around, and I really liked how there's no guns. There's crossbows and like regular bow and arrows that you can use if you want to do a ranged approach. But when it comes to the hand to hand combat, there's a ton of weapons that you can add a lot of things to that will do, like fire damage, poison damage, electrical damage, things like that. Or you could just, what I did most of the time was I just found really good weapons like katanas and things like that that would do absolutely crazy damage if you're just doing light attacks, especially heavy attacks that you can get new moves and skill sets for when you upgrade Aiden through your combat abilities, which again you get through combat side missions that you could do. Some missions will offer more experience, but of course, too, just getting into combats at night and during the day. Same thing with your parkour, where there's a lot of abilities that will basically just give you more stamina, be able to jump farther, jump off enemies. There's a lot of upgrades that's come in the form of combat and agility, and just makes the game a lot more smoother and fun to play as you unlock them. So if it feels very clunky in the first few hours, it's kind of meant to, and then you get a lot better. I will find that this was a kind of an interesting way to do it, since Aiden's supposed to have been night running for about 10 years now, or he's what they call a pilgrim, who's someone who runs and delivers messages in between cities and kind of goes into the most dangerous parts, which is outside of cities where zombies roam free and it's very, very dangerous. So I was surprised they felt so clunky right off the start after doing it for so long. But of course, as you get upgrades and things like that, you get a lot better at Stream Slides itself. I just found it like, again, it was a weird choice for him that feels so clunky after he's been doing this for such a long time. But yes, Aiden, as I mentioned, pilgrim, runs in between places. He is looking for his sister, who he was separated from for over 15 years, really. And he gets a tip that she may be in the city that you go to, Old Villador. And then as you progress, you find out that she's actually going to be in the inner city of Old Villador, which has been sectioned off. Or I should really say that there's three. There's just the regular citizens, there's peacekeepers who have basically seized military control and weapons and upgrades that they basically control, and they want to establish law. And then there's the renegades, who are just basically think of them as your typical bandit group in this. And all three of them are in a struggle for power, for water, and for land and resources, really. And they definitely have a tough time sharing and getting along with one another. So you're able to pick sides actually between all three of them in this game. There's options that will really test your allegiances with them and who you give power to. And by doing so, you are going to get certain upgrades in terms of weapons. If you go with peacekeepers, you'll find a lot more electric fences and traps that will make a lot easier to get around combat wise, dealing with the infected and the zombies in this game. But if you go with more of the general population, you'll find more zip lines, trampolines, vents that you use your paraglider to get around in the air a lot easier. So not so much in terms of combat it's going to be easier, but getting around the city by doing your parkour is going to be a lot easier if you side with the civilians over the peacekeepers. And of course, there isn't really any upgrades for the renegades, and there isn't too many choices that will allow you to align with them. But there is a chance for you to come to an understanding with them through the main story in this game. And I mean, that's the way that I went. For spoiler's sake, I'm not going to really say what it entails, but they're definitely a good choice to have on your good side, at least for a certain mission near the end game. But yes, Aiden is on the search for his sister. The last time they saw each other, they were kids, and they were part of basically a testing facility where kids were known to have a bit more immunity, so they were put through a lot of tests that really fucked them up when they were kids. And yeah, he's basically just trying to find and get back to his sister. And along the way, you meet a few other people who were a part of this program. And you have to basically get clues from them through, I mean, of course, alliances with them, doing things for them, and moving throughout the city. And there's a lot of people who are going to want to help you in your mission or even stop you from doing so in this game, depending on the choices that you make. I did find that in kind of the promotions of this, there was huge emphasis that your choices were going to shape the world around you and the relationships that you have. And even though there are some bigger choices in this game that will kind of affect how the story goes, again, I've only played this once. It doesn't really seem like there is a ton of options that actually change the environment and the big ways that this game was kind of showcasing. But you do see it's, like I said, through who you give the resources to when you unlock substations, unlock windmills, and kind of gain territory and water towers for the people, depending on if you give them to the regular civilians or peacekeepers. But in terms of the main story, I think everyone's going to have a decently similar approach to the alliances that they make. Really, the big one that I had was the first water tower that you gang. I gave it to the peacekeepers, and that ended up I mean, a bit of a spoiler here, but it created a civil war in Old Villador. That's when I revisited. Basically, everyone was out to kill me because, again, I started a civil war that just tore apart this town. And That was definitely one of the bigger ones that I had, but all the choices that I made in the inner city didn't really seem to matter as much as that first one did. They all seemed very small scale and things that kind of would have happened anyways, no matter kind of what choice I made. But the one thing that I did really, really like is no matter what choice I was making, there was always a negative consequence or someone who is being harmed by it. It wasn't just like, oh, I make this choice and everything's going to be good no matter what. I would actually be taken away to places by the parties I would harm from my choices. There was always a silver lining for you where you'd get bonuses, resources, things like that. But then there was always a dark side that would come back to haunt you at some point in the game, sometimes immediately, sometimes later on, like I said, when I revisited Old Villador in this game. And that's something I do applaud. So while I don't think the scale of the choices was kind of exact to what they were showing off the trailers and kind of gameplay demos for this game, it was definitely a lot better than a lot of choice-based games that you will find anywhere on the market. In terms of the story, again, the first like 3 hours is kind of rough when I was wondering what was going to happen, but then it really starts to kick into gear and gives you these choices to make that I did have to think about quite a bit for some of them. And again, it was just it turned into a blast throughout. Some of the side missions are really, really fun to go through too. I haven't done all of them, as I've said and stated earlier, but very, very fun to go through and play. And there's some really good stories that I was able to find in there. The main story itself, again, really gained steam through after the first 3 hours, but in the last, I want to say two, the game kind of fell apart for me and got really goofy, and I didn't really care for Aiden. I didn't really care for the main villain who was in this. It's just I didn't find he had enough backstory to make him a compelling villain in any way. Like there was no way that I was going to side with him, and it doesn't really give you a choice to too. But the one thing that kind of annoyed me most about the story in this game is there's a lot of like you passing out and all of a sudden ending up in a brand new place without too much explanation. A lot of like you get into a fight, punches are thrown, you pass out, and you wake up and you do it again, and then pass out again, and then that happens again, and just a lot of the conversations that you have too are just really dragged out. Same with the fight sequences in this game, and a lot of other things, which just really took away from a lot of the impact and emphasis that I think the scenes were trying to convey. I found myself having to skip through a lot of conversations that just had so much kind of pointless dialogue where I found that it was just too much dialogue that they were putting into, and thank goodness there was a skip button, or else I felt like I would have been my 30-hour playthrough would have been close to 35, 36 or more hours if I was to listen and go through all the dialogue. And I feel like when it comes to the side missions, I am going to be streamlining through that quite often. And the pacing, again, from this campaign, as I've kind of sort of hinted at, isn't the greatest. It has its moments where it really kicks in the high gear and it's amazing, but there's a lot of really slow and dragged out moments that don't just come from over excessive dialogue, just a lot of searching, a lot of like looking for resources in the environments that will help you out a little bit in terms of your crafting and things like that, but ultimately you find so much money in the world that it's a lot easier to just buy items and upgrades than it is to find them in the open world. It's just a lot more effective for your time, I found, than it was actually searching and crafting everything on your own. But the crafting system in this game, similar to The Last of Us 2, but not a pop up menu that happens in real time. You do pause the game and look through that, and you're able to craft med kits for yourself, boosters that will increase your immunity at night. Because, of course, as this game is stated, stay human, you are turning into a zombie. The only way to do that is by taking boosters at night that basically inject UV lights, for lack of a better word, into your system, and also too going in the safe zones that have UV lights to keep your contamination under control. If you're out in the dark for too long and don't have boosters, or you can't get to a safe zone, you will turn into a zombie and get the game over screen. And of course, too, there's weapon crafting that you can do. As I mentioned a little earlier, you can add a bunch of different kind of effects to your weapons, but you can also craft Molotovs, throwing knives, grenades, and Molotovs are definitely your best friend in this game. They will slow enemies down a lot, and then you can just basically get right to them and slash them and take away a ton of health. Blocking is definitely something you want to do, and there's a lot of moves where if you block enemies, you can stun them and then go at them and get a few shots in, or if there's multiple enemies, block, staggers them, you can jump on top of them and drop kick another enemy and basically take out half of their health in that one move and kick. So it's definitely a very good way to clear out a lot of enemies, separate yourself from them, and take a lot of health away from the one that you kick. So there's a lot of very fun ways to approach the combat in this, or you can just run away, which I do recommend doing with a lot of the zombies and volatiles because I find that was the easiest way to get around it. And I did find that this game was a lot easier and it felt like there was less zombies in the area. Nighttime was a lot scarier and a lot tougher to get around than it was in this game, just because of the amounts of parkour options that, again, are very, very fun. But I just found it made the game probably too easy. There's howlers that will alert zombies and start to chase, but all you have to do is get to a UV zone, and they're very easy to do so. Or you just have to climb high enough into a building, and you're safe essentially, unless there's zombies inside that building, which a lot of the times there aren't. So again, nighttime was a lot scarier, and I find it a lot more devastating in the first game than it was in this one. But there is a lot of gameplay elements that they're able to put into this that are really fun with nighttime, where during the days, a lot of zombies will go into hiding underground, kind of in these tunnels during the day, but at nights they clear out. So there's really good loot inside these tunnels and a lot of like safe stations that you can build that allow for fast travel and just kind of stations for humans to kind of find settlements. So the best time to go into those are at night when they're already mostly clear. Where if you go during the day, there's going to be tons of volatiles in there and bigger enemies that it's just I do not recommend trying to do these things during the day because that's when the game gets really hard. But overall, this is definitely a step up from the first game, and I enjoyed it a lot more. Co-op is very, very fun if you get into it too. It's really fun to run around with a buddy or more in this, and yeah, it's just very, very fun. There's definitely a lot of patches and bug fixes that they need to do to make this game a lot more playable, a lot more fun, and just kind of run a lot smoother. But again, on PC, it does run just fine, and once you get the upgrades, it's really, really awesome to go around and play with your buds. So even though there is a ton of improvements that need to be done, overall, I'm going to give Dying Light 2 a 6.5 out of 10. That can easily get to a 7 when they start patching a few of these things, or even higher if they start doing so. And it is way better than the first one was in a lot of aspects, and I feel like if they do make a third one, storytelling is kind of where they need to focus a little bit more, but in terms of just all the extra missions that they added in this, the streamlining of the combats, the parkour, and all these things, this is a really great formula for something that could turn even better down the line if they add more DLCs or even vehicles like they did in DLCs in the first one. There's a lot that they can do with this, and I'm very excited to see what they have down the line for Dying Light 2 Stay Human, and of course for future Dying Light games. So if you play Dying Light 2 Stay Human, please let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. And yeah, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. You can check out all the other video game reviews that I do on my channel, or everything that I do through my playlist down below. And for convenience sake, I'll link them up top here. I'm also going to link that, my playthrough for convenience sake as well. And subscribe to the little ringer on if you want to check out everything I do live stream and Twitch wise. There is a link to that in the bio of this video and also on my channel. And in both of those places, there's a link to the Medium Mountain, which is my Discord, where we talk about movies, video games, comic books, TV, pretty much everything that's awesome in this world. So you can definitely join that amazing community. I'll make it even more amazing than it is already. Dying Light 2, still full price. You can find it on Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, even the old generation of consoles. You'll be able to find it. And yeah, just awesome, guys.